Hey, everybody, welcome to the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson, and we continue our MYFIVE series talking with photographers and photo professionals about photography. And we asked them to talk about 5 images that have somehow influenced their creative growth, somehow has affected them as photographers or instructors or whatever they happen to be. Today, we have Brett Erickson. Brett, welcome to the Crit
Hello.
House. Hey there.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
We are going to talk to Brett about 5 images he has selected from Sam Abell, Andrew Wyeth, Andre Cortez, Ronnie Horn, and Seshu Toyo. Brett, it is lovely to have you on the program. I will say that you are the first person to come on whose images were selected as somebody else's MYFIVE. It's an honor to have you, and it's been fun learning about you as I do a little research ahead of time before we start to talk. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So am I.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. So I know you are you are a doctor in terms of being a PhD. You do a lot of teaching. You are a photographer yourself. How do you talk about yourself as a photographic human?
First and foremost, I'm a teaching monk, if you will. For me, photography is, as we spoke a little bit earlier, for me, photography is a journey toward the within. And as others, photography is a world of accolades. And in some ways, much to the chagrin of some of the people I know, I actively eschew all of that. I hide from the world in a lot of ways because for me, some of that is noise. Actually, a lot of it is noise. And that takes away from my ability to sit down and contemplate and to think about what photographs can and should mean and what they can reveal about the human soul. That means that I'm more often than not engaged in some conversations that I imagine people who meet me on the street find terribly both esoteric and boring. Other people watch Netflix. I read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Well, in the little time that we have had to talk, I have found your insight into photography is fascinating, and that's one of the good things that's going to be, I think, about this program. But so you've selected 5 images.
I have.
A lot of people say that's a really hard process, and I'm wondering, like, first of all, was it hard for you? And what did you go through in making your decision for the 5 pieces of art that we're going to talk about today?
The first was very easy, simply because I run and hide from certain parts of the world of photography doesn't mean that I haven't been there a long time. And so the first was very simple. The second was very simple. The third, nearly as easy. The fourth as well. And the fifth was the one that this evening that was a bit of a struggle. And there's a very reasonable explanation for that, and it's not one of an inability to find, but an inability to decide, because the ones that we discussed are all equally profound for me. And again, that's food for later when we actually look at the images.
Well, let's do that now. Let's
Okay.
let's see what people think about your images and how you talk about them. So Sam Abell was the first person to come on this program to do a MYFIVE, just a legend in my mind, and you have selected him as your first image. This is the one you said was easy.
The easiest, in fact. Okay. And in fact, I would argue the easiest of any image in my life. So my mother tells a story that my grandmother, like most grandmothers at that time, kept National Geographics down the basement. But at 4 or 5, my mother said I ran upstairs from the basement where my grandmother kept National Geographics from the 1920s even. And I ran upstairs with this image and I held this out and to my parents said, "This is what I want to do."
Did you say you were 4 or 5 when that happened?
4 or 5.
Unbelievable.
And it moved, and it moved me at that moment, and it has been the cornerstone for me, for my entire life in photography. I think for me, it was that toward the within began here. And because if you look at these men as they're out on, the North Atlantic, out in these tiny, dories, they're so within themselves. And in Zen aesthetics, Japanese aesthetics, we talk about yugen and this idea of mysterious beauty. Are they beautiful? Probably not in a traditional sense, but certainly within an existential, a transcendental sense, they are incredible. And the idea of, what can they be? How do they move past? And for me, it was and still is the idea. There's a word satori, which is enlightenment in aesthetics, and this represents that. It embodies so much of Zen aesthetics and of humanity and existence and philosophy, and I've spent the better part of my adult life, actually all of my adult life, with this image, and most of my childhood. And there is not a moment in all of those years that I cannot pull this image out and be left speechless.
Well, so you have gone from what is a very moving image from Sam Abell, and your second image that we will talk about, painting from Andrew Wyeth.
This is Christina's World, and
Yes.
1948. And much like with Sam's image, the sense of emptiness, the sense of being alone within oneself, and there's a soulfulness to it. And for me, this felt very much like the Doryman. And so to encounter Sam's image and then to find Wyeth, and if taken in tandem, both of those images together impart a very specific aesthetic, and it's one of something being in color but barely, as Sam would say. For me, that spoke. Colors are very intense for me, and I think so. I avoided them in some ways because of the neural overload, if you will, and another reason for going to study these things. But the understanding of the texture and the light on the buildings and that harsh light and the clouds off in the horizon and the emptiness and that sense of being within the soul and it being not beautiful, but at the same time, that sense of yugen, where is it beautiful right now? Perhaps not, but yugen is about beauty past and beauty future, and this and the struggle for that. And in fact, Wyeth, in this piece, she was a paraplegic, Christina, and she would drag herself using her hands back to the house. And he painted her for much of her life. And that idea of, for me, it was the struggle within the soul, and she characterized that so much, and that effervescent nature of that dress. And from what I understand from sources who really should know because they were friends with Wyeth, said when he dropped that color onto the canvas, he was taken aback with how powerful it was. And I think that is, in some ways, that is Satori, which, that idea of enlightenment. And for me, this painting has always done that. You can find much of its influence in my own work.
Andre Cortez with this lovely image from Martinique.
Yeah, so this is Martinique, 1972, and the reason I picked this, Cortez and his surrealism really have been that third influence for me, is that Wyeth represented with some mystery. Sam showed the within. And for me, it was about also the idea of Zen within a dream world. And how far back can I step images to a point in which the viewer must place themselves. And there's a wonderful axiom from Basho, the greatest of the Japanese haiku poets, really the greatest Japanese poet, in which he talks about the poet can only provide at his best 60% of, or 6/10 of the poem itself in terms of the meaning, and the reader, or in this case the viewer, must provide the rest. And I think that's a valuable lesson in images. How much can we take away before the viewer must insert themselves within it? And if you read Camera Lucida, one of the great treatises on photography, we have both studium and punctum. And studium is this idea that we can study an image, but punctum is a detail, something there that must stay with us. And my question was always, does it have to be a detail that's overt, or can it be a detail that is hinted and nothing else? And for me, cortege in this image does that. There is a detail that sticks with us. And honestly, if you look at the center, down to the third on the left-hand side, there is this sense of this object that's in there. And what is the figure grasping? Are they holding on to the rail? And there's just enough there that we can hint at it. But we don't know the person, and we don't understand what we're seeing. And the geometry of this and the way that plays in is crucial as well. That journey, and these three images in sequence, I would say, have informed really my life's work.
Ronnie Horn, who I have no familiarity with, and given the conversation we have already had, I don't know where you're going with this conversation. So lead me through why Ronnie Horn in this image is here with us today.
So Ronnie Horn's work, You Are the Weather, which is a series of dozens of images made in Iceland over 1994, between 1994 and 1995, of the same young woman in varied settings, in varying weathers and in varying moods, and both in black and white and color. This was, I remember seeing a feature in a magazine about this when I was just finishing college. And it was frankly as formative for me at that moment of what images should do, not if necessarily in terms of style, but certainly in terms of, again, existentialism, transcendentalism, we would argue metaphysics, because here is someone in which we're asked to contemplate on a very intimate level, and not to assign her any meaning other than for us to have an emotional conversation between someone we don't know, and to move throughout a virtually empty space with small images of this nature. Really, it changed me. And I began to think about how we thought about others and the way in which we spent time, even more so with images. And it piggybacked, if you will, on Wyeth for me, and on cortege. This, in terms of meaning for me, as opposed to composition or visual style, these last two, in fact, are absolutely essential to my being as a visual philosopher.
Well, you have brought something to these images that I certainly did not see on my own. So, Professor, bring us home with Sesshu Toyo.
I picked this one, and this was difficult, this image, which is from 1495,
Hmm.
is considered it is one of the national treasures of Japan. And so I'm going to take you through a journey quickly on this. And it is ink on paper. And it was made when Sesshu Toyo in Japanese years was 76 years old. And if you begin to look, you can see a tree begin to emerge. And as you look down, you begin to see a small spit of land, and the tree is hinted, but not shown. And this spit of land, if you look down below, extends out into a body of water. And that body of water has ripples in it. And upon that body of water in the lower right-hand corner are two figures in a boat. And as we move back toward the shore, we can see that, in fact, there's a house and has a sign for a tavern there. And it's fenced in. And we have the hint of that tavern. And as we move back toward the left again, we can see that it's a misty day, and there are other trees shrouded in the mist. And as we look up, we can see the mountains shrouded in the mist behind, and the sense of depth. And that this was executed in only a few minutes, with an ink wash and only a few, sharp lines, is positively miraculous. And it is a national treasure for very good reason. And our ability to spend time within this image, and I have spent years, decades, coming back to this image again and again and again, and it moves me to the deepest levels of being, and the understanding of how it does so much with so little, and infers so much about the nature of what was and what is and what will be. And it is enlightenment to me. It is satori. It is the idea of Yugen in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for all of your insight, because I think you have opened my eyes in a way that I wasn't expecting for our conversation, which is exactly why we do the Crit House and we have these MYFIVE conversations. Dr. Brett Erickson, thank you for joining us on the Crit House, and thank you all for watching the Crit House as well.